Greetings and welcome to part 1 of the introduction to my video series, How Not to Do Business. My name is Paul B. and I am the Homeless Consultant. And in this first part of the introduction, I'm going to just kind of gloss over the experience of homelessness for me and how it brought me to work for this small business that I'm going to use as a model throughout this series on how not to do business. And let me start out by just saying what the kind of the purposes of this series are. First, I honestly mean for this to be of practical value to you as a business owner, a business operator, an executive, a manager, all the way up to corporate executives and board members, and also business students, business schools, anyone associated with business. And you might wonder, how can a homeless person, a person living in a car like this, in pretty desperate situation, how could I have anything of value for you? I think you're going to be really surprised. And in fact, I want you to be really, really surprised. The reason is because of the other reasons I'm doing this series. Part of it is to tell my own story of what it has been like to be homeless when you're attempting to, rather than become dependent on government assistance, you're trying to work for a living. You're trying to maintain the same sense of hard work ethic and accomplishment and goal setting that you have throughout your entire life. The problem is, the system out there, the way it deals with the homeless, is so corrupted and corroded to the core that I am in a worse position than people who just want to live off government assistance for the rest of their lives. And that's what you're going to find here, is that someone who's as competent as I am, it's actually a disadvantage being in this system, particularly in the state of Minnesota. Another reason along these lines is I want to expose you to the reality of homelessness. Now, granted, that's from my own personal experience. I don't claim to be a typical homeless person. I am not someone who lives in a bottle in New York City, for example. Their experience is going to be very different, and I understand that. But what I call involuntary homelessness, somebody who does not want to be homeless and they're willing to work harder than you can possibly imagine to get out of it if the laws would allow them to do that. I want to show you this reality, because what you're going to find is that anything I need to do, practically speaking, to get out of homelessness is either illegal or immoral. It's not practical. It's not feasible for various reasons. And if we had a system that was designed in any way, shape, or form to truly help the homeless, that wouldn't be the case. And the last reason I'm doing this, let's be honest, I'm trying to get support from people. I would like to get... one reason I want to give you something that is of true value to you as a business person, something that you can really use in your business life, is because, you know, I'm kind of giving you a product and I'm asking you to help me back in return, in appreciation. So I am trying to drum up some support through donations, job offers, anything that will help me so I don't have to live in this car anymore. Because the fact is, today is the first real winter day of the year here in Minnesota. Minnesota winter lasts about 6 months. There's a blizzard coming in, and if I don't get some help, I'm not going to survive it. I've just cut to the chase. That's the way it is. So let's get started here. I have to mention that I did not study business in school, in college. In fact, I hated business. I studied the sciences, particularly computer science, which I have a degree in, and astronomy, astrophysics, physics, mathematics, those kinds of things. Now, one consequence of that is that I'm very much geared toward logic and systems analysis, pattern recognition, and natural law. So that's kind of where I come from. I'm an observer, and I kind of run things through these various algorithms and analyses. And when I ended up working in business instead of in the sciences, I applied that in my business life, and what do you know, it actually served me very, very well. So there's one when I say you're going to get a totally different perspective from me than you would get from the typical business media, that's what I'm talking about. So the way I learned about business was by doing it. Like so many people, they get out of school and they don't end up working in the fields that they trained for. And I've had two major jobs in my life after college, that lasted many years, and I love them both dearly. I didn't like them when I first started because I entered at the bottom, but within a few months I rose up quite high. In the first case, I rose to become my boss's boss's boss at the corporate office in San Diego. I got moved cross country in about 6 months. In the second case, in about 2 months, I got promoted. In both cases, they created job titles and positions just for me because I had such a broad set of skills, and bless their hearts, in both cases they saw in me and they trusted me enough to more or less let me just go at it. I mean, I hardly even had supervision because they knew they could rely on me. I was going to get the job done. And I don't say that to blow my horn at all. I mean, I make mistakes like everyone else, there's no doubt about it. But I say that to let you know, I want you to understand that I am competent. I do not live in a bottle. I have no track marks. I do not do drugs. I've never used drugs. I am certainly not lazy by any stretch of the imagination. I work harder than most people will ever comprehend. I mean, especially when you're in this situation, the amount of energy and focus and effort that it takes to get even minimal things done is extraordinary. But to the best of my ability, I still do it. I do work very, very hard. So again, I loved these jobs I had at these other companies. In one case, I was a revenue manager for a portfolio of businesses all across the country, and I had to travel, and that involved things like mainly trying to improve their revenues, which got me into sales and marketing, things like that. But I would also evaluate portfolios that they were thinking of purchasing, their revenue and their revenue potential, things like that. And I absolutely loved it, and I developed a lot of my own processes and checklists and algorithms for improving revenues, and I'm very proud of that. At the other job, I entered in, went back to more of my computer skills, and I was in data management, but I also worked very closely with document control and regulatory affairs. So that involved me with government regulations, document control, that kind of thing. Now here's the thing. This is something I've done since I was the youngest kid who had just learned how to read and had a library card. I'm just fascinated by the world, and I'm fascinated by everything I can get my hands on. I'm always learning. I just consumed our public library probably by the time I was 12 or something. I was one of those annoying students who the teachers in high school didn't like because, again, I'm not trying to blow my own horn, it's just I love doing this, and often I knew more than they did. For example, in computer science, this is when computers were brand new in the early 80s. They wouldn't even let me take the computer class, the brand new computer class, in my high school because I already knew it all. I mean, I was already one of the better hackers out there, and they wouldn't let me take the class. That kind of thing. So, and again, I don't claim to be a brilliant person. I mean, I was an honors student, whatever that's worth, but I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm trying to show you how motivated and dedicated I am, and most of all, how fascinated I am by this stuff. I'm going out and learning about everything, history, science, and yes, even business and economics. And that's what happened. When I ended up working in business, it was now my job, and I became fascinated with it at that time. So I started learning everything I could about it. And I would go out and I would learn all I could about different departments and different, when I worked in revenue management, I would talk to the lawyers, I would talk to the accountants, I would talk to the managers of these businesses, and I just learned everything I could about every aspect of it. And that allowed me to tie things together, to see things that other people didn't see, because I had a broader knowledge. At this other company, which made medical devices, multinational corporation in this case, and our site had it was the world headquarters of this division, but it was part of a larger multinational conglomerate that was based in the UK. And in that case, again, stepping in at the level of data management, again, I went out and I talked to everyone in all these departments, supply chain and marketing and engineering, the warehouse, everything. And I got on the phone and I talked to our people in China and Italy and all around the world. And I got to know these people and I got to know what their jobs were and how it fit into the big picture of the company. And in the end, I got to know more about really how that company worked in a broad sense than most people who worked there, even for many more years than I did. I was there for about 7 years. And the thing is, that served me really well, and I think it will serve you really well too. So if I were to give you any advice or tips from the beginning, I would say, a curious mind goes a long way. Because all too often we specialize too much, we become myopic, we sit in our cubes, and we don't know what's going on elsewhere in the company. And unfortunately, that same attitude continues all the way up to presidents, vice presidents, CEOs. And I think that is one of the problems we have in business today. But that's something I'll get into later. In terms of my current situation, being homeless, living in a car, and having, at this point, no resources. I mean, I'm to the point where these hot coffees are going to stop. I don't have enough for them. They're $1 a piece. Just as it gets freezing cold, no less. Lucky me. As I've been fighting this battle for about 2 years now, I've learned so much about homelessness and about society's way of dealing with the homeless and government's way of dealing with the homeless. And it's not even remotely like what you see on TV or hear in the radio or the newspapers. It's totally different. And I want to focus on the aspects of that that are related to this project, this How Not to Do Business particularly. But I will on occasion mention some things that may not seem totally related, because it's kind of hard to know where to draw that line. So let me just say that one reason I have fought so hard to stay alive, of course I would never crawl into a bottle or do drugs. I just wouldn't do that. Having a clear mind means so much to me. I would never take a drug that alters with your mind. And I love to learn about things, so I'm always doing that, even sitting in this car. And of course, I applied those skills I had learned, those research skills, into learning about the system that deals with the homeless out there. And that's why I feel very qualified, more than most people, to talk about that system. And it isn't just a broken system, it is a fundamentally flawed system. It is, in many ways, a corrupt system. It is certainly negligent and incompetent. And it's, in fact, hurting the homeless. It's killing many of the homeless. It's a bad thing, and that's why I need to integrate my story of being homeless with this How Not to Do Business. So again, in this particular part of the introduction, I'm going to focus more on the homeless aspect. The others, I get into the business. If I can keep talking, it is really cold. My throat is raw. So I want to give you one thing, though, that might help you in your business life. One thing that has kept me with the gloves on, just fighting to stay alive, even as I butt heads with all these systems and individuals who just don't, frankly, care if I live or die, even though they go on TV and beg for money to help with people in my situation. But in the real world, they really just don't care if I live or die. And one reason I've kept fighting and going on and on and on, part of it's because I have goals in my life I want to fulfill. I have a life I want to live. I'm only 49 years old. I don't want to die out here. But another reason is I have role models, and I want to tell you about one of them, Ernest Shackleton. And I can't urge you enough to look this up. The Endurance, the Shackleton expedition. At the beginning of World War I, Shackleton had tried to reach the South Pole first, and he didn't make it. Someone else got there first. So then he put together an expedition to go be the first one to walk across all of Antarctica. And it's pretty famous, the ad he put in the paper. If I can find it, I'll try to put it on here. But it said something like, odds of survival are slim, but if we do survive, fame and glory will be yours, that kind of thing. And by golly, he got some great men who signed up for that expedition. And you'll see how great they were when you see what happened to them. Shackleton, they headed down to Antarctica, and they got within eyesight of the land, or the ice, and then winter came in and the ice went around their boat, and they lived in the boat for much of that season, but in the end the ice won and it crushed their ship, the Endurance. And from then on they were on foot on ice that was going to melt and into the ocean. And the thing is, Ernest Shackleton was a man like he's a lot like me. He's just driven. He's driven by a sense of accomplishment and these goals. If he has a goal, he's going to go for it with all his energy. Like I'm going for the goal of staying alive, despite what apparently the state of Minnesota would prefer for me. I want to live. And his goal was to cross Antarctica first. But the thing is, the instant that boat collapsed, and it became impossible for him to do that, the instant that happened. My apologies for the jump cut. I ran out of battery power as I was talking. As I was saying, though, the instant that the Endurance was crushed by the ice, Shackleton changed his focus from being the first to cross Antarctica to bringing his men home alive, whatever it took. And that became his goal. And it took 2 years and an amount of human suffering that most people will never be able to relate to, including me, in all fairness. But he did it. He brought them all home alive. And I am so inspired by the Shackleton expedition. Please, if you have a chance, look that up. His family motto was, "By endurance we shall prevail." And that's why I've had the gloves on and I've been fighting and fighting and fighting trying to survive here. That's why I'm doing a series like this instead of crawling into a bottle or something. Now the fact is, though, the reality I'm dealing with homelessness out here is, again, nothing like what you see in the media. One of the things that made me a little different growing up was that I have a passion for truth. And I don't have a fear of truth. And today in particular, we seem to have a lot of people who fear the truth. And because of that, I had a lot of contempt for, say, junk science. People who corrupt science for political and social agendas. I don't like crooks and criminals. I don't like corrupt government. It really bothers me. I love truth, and the truth can sometimes hurt, there's no doubt. But the thing is, I live in a world, and I want to know what this world is that I live in. And the only way I'm going to get there is if I know the truth. If I'm just in this world to delude myself throughout my entire life, then what was the point of being here? I just lived in a fantasy the whole time. And maybe other people suffered because I was living a fantasy. So I'm going to tell you the truth about homelessness, and you may not want to hear it, but it is the truth. What else can I do? The truth is, while there's people out there who do care in a sense that they feel something in their heart for people who are suffering in homelessness, when it comes right down to it, most of the people out there, including the people who work at jobs that are specifically supposed to be helping the homeless and the government and such, when it comes down to what their actions demonstrate, they really don't care. And they might feel a small tug at the heart if a homeless person dies because of their neglect or something, but the fact is they will allow masses of people to be very hungry, very miserable, not make the most out of their lives, go out and work and be productive in society, and ultimately possibly die. They're content to watch that happen for the most part. And you know that, you know I'm telling the truth because there are 3 million homeless people in the most prosperous nation in the world has ever known. And there's all these millions and billions of dollars being pumped into homelessness, supposedly to deal with it, but where's that money ending up? It's not ending up in homeless people's pockets, it's ending up in the pockets of the people who run that system. And that's the truth. So I'm going to tell you what, based on my observations, again, systems analysis, logic, looking for the truth, passion for the truth, I'm going to tell you the way I see things here in Minnesota, based on my experience. In Minnesota, their strategy overall for dealing with the problem of homelessness is to exterminate the homeless off camera. And when I use the word exterminate, don't let it push your emotional buttons. I'm not talking about genocide. although in some ways you could consider it a negligent genocide. Since it's off camera, who cares, right? No harm, no foul if you don't see it. But I'm not talking about murder and slaughter. I am talking about they the state of Minnesota does things that, well, let me put it this way. There's three basic ways they handle the homeless issue. One I've already addressed. It's these systems that they pump all this money into, and they give people job titles and jobs and benefits. And it's a self-perpetuating system, much like you'll see in a business. And it ends up serving the people in that system and totally neglecting the people outside the system. But one way you serve the people in that system, and you serve the money machine that feeds that system and keeps it alive, like blood, is occasionally you do help a homeless person here, you help a homeless person there, a homeless family there, a homeless child here. But when you do it, you make sure you've got all the cameras in there, and that they put it in the Star Tribune and NPR, KSTP, KARE 11. They put it in all these media, right? And that serves their own interests. Now, yes, they did help a particular family or individual here and there, but most of these people are out there suffering in a degree of misery that you would never think was even possible in the United States of America. And the fact is, from what I've seen, nobody cares. Nobody cares unless they get something out of helping them. And the best example, I hate to say it, but the best example is me. I am so competent. I am so motivated. I am so free of these things that, the insanity, the mental illness, the physical disability. I'm free of any kind of drug use or alcohol. Getting me out of homelessness should be the easiest thing in the world. I mean, I can't imagine a person who it would be easier to get out of homelessness if they were even trying. But I've been at it for 2 years, and they don't help at all. They want to make me dependent on government instead, and I don't want that. I don't want that. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. So the first way they exterminate the homeless basically is they do it through this system that is self-serving. So those people don't get any help, and then those people end up going to these other two ways of being exterminated. The first one is they get intimidated or neglected or frustrated to the point where they leave and they go to another jurisdiction and they become somebody else's problem. So it may be just moving to another city. They got no satisfaction in Minneapolis, so they move to Duluth if they're able, but then they get the same thing there. Ultimately, the goal, not stated goal, but the way the system makes it happen is that these people will just leave the state. They'll go to Iowa, they'll go to North Dakota, Wisconsin, Canada, and then there's someone else's problem. Minnesota no longer has them as a problem. Now, I'm not going to say Iowa wouldn't do the same thing, or Wisconsin. I don't know. They might do the same thing and push people down toward Illinois. I don't know. But this is the way it is in Minnesota. The third way that they exterminate the homeless is they just do, in fact, allow them to experience what I'm experiencing with no money, no resources, no help of any kind, because again, I have to be honest, I'm a healthy white male, so I'm not eligible for any help. And they will just let me die. And since it's going to happen off camera, no one will ever know. Watch a documentary film called A Certain Kind of Death, and you'll see what happens to people like me. They are cremated and buried in a mass grave off camera. No one ever even knows it happened. Because you know what? I don't have any family, and I lost touch with all my friends, because when I moved to Minnesota, all my friends were in other states I'd lived in, and that one job I had there had me moving around the country all the time. So it was hard to establish these permanent relationships. When I got to Minnesota, I worked so hard for this company for the 7 years I was there, I lost track of everyone I had known previously. I was basically kind of fell into workaholism, if anything. So I had nobody to help me. And because of that, I was going to the government and these social services, and 100 Minnesota churches, none of them did anything of any value at all. As much as I appreciate someone giving me a gas card for $20, I mean, I really do appreciate it, but I wanted my problem solved once and for all, permanently. And then I could be one of those people who goes out and maybe distributes $20 gas cards out of my own pocket to help them. But no one would do that for me. They would just give me the gas card, and a week later it's gone and I'm back where I started. So that's how they exterminate the homeless. It's a lot like if you have a house and it has termite problem, and let's say you bring in an exterminator and you go out and watch a movie while they do their work. Do you really care if the exterminator actually killed all of the termites, or if they sprayed something that the termites couldn't stand to be around and it chased them away and they will never come back because they can't stand whatever it is they sprayed in there? The point is, when you got home, the termites were gone. They were exterminated. Didn't mean they were killed. That's what they're doing with the homeless in Minnesota. And I could give you example after example after example to back this up, but that isn't the topic of this series on business. So I'm trying to figure out where to draw that appropriate line. If you people out there watching want to know more about this, maybe send me emails, leave comments, and let me know that, and then maybe I can bring this in. I really want to tell you so much about my experience of being homeless, but I'm trying to keep this focused on business. So I'm going to jump ahead now, and I'm not going to tell you how I became homeless specifically. And the main reason is because it was a perfect storm of events. They all hit at once. Again, I had no support system, no family, and my friendships had kind of faded. I was working so hard at this company, and I was working on personal projects so, diligently that I didn't have any support system. But I will say that a lot of what ended up making me homeless had to do with this drive within me that cannot handle corruption. So I was fighting and exposing government corruption in Minnesota, and basically, even though I was fighting. I mean, when I was in Cub Scouts and I found my Cub Scout uniform when I was cleaning out my stuff, the shirt was the size of the pocket in this shirt. I don't know how I ever fit in this thing. And going all the way back to Cub Scouts, I learned about civic duty, and they still taught real civics back in school when I was in school. And I take it seriously. I take it very seriously. For example, I'm very upset that I was denied my right to vote in the state of Minnesota because I'm homeless last week in the general election. I'm furious about that. I take that right to vote seriously. People fought and died and lost limbs. Many people were driven to tears to ensure me the right to vote. Minnesota just took it away because I'm homeless. And the media will not talk about it. I went straight to the media and they didn't want to tell anybody about it. That's what I'm dealing with. The point is, I take that seriously because when I was young in Cub Scouts and things like that, I learned about civic duty, and I take it very seriously. When you join the military, which I never did, but you join you take public office, you take an oath to protect, defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And the path I chose in life was not to go against foreign enemies in the military. It was to fight domestic enemies, corruption, crime, people who are stealing, people who are lying, cheating, stealing in our government. And Minnesota has so much of that. I went after it just a little bit, and that's all it took for them to just destroy me. So I'm not going to say that's the only reason I'm homeless. It was this perfect storm of, losing my job at this place. So they had mass layoffs and things, all happening at once without a support system. But the straw that really broke the camel's back was that I was fighting against this corruption, and even though all the people around me who I was trying to defend with this activity agreed with me, none of them had the courage or the moral courage to take a stand next to me. They just let me do it all by myself. And when I put my head on the chopping block, the state just cut my head off. And that's why I'm living in a car. See? No bottle, no track marks, no heroin, no laziness, no irresponsibility. How about that? It's not always what you see on TV, is it? But the media out here has a symbiotic relationship with the government. They protect the government from exposure of these things, and then the government gives the media access. So the media here is never going to tell you about this. You're only going to get it here. So I'll just leave it at that as far as how I became homeless. The rest isn't relevant. The thing is, when I became homeless and I started losing everything, I mean everything I'd worked my entire life for, and I go all the way up to the 401k, the life insurance, all the way down to possessions I had bought over the years. I lost it all by attrition. And a lot of it's because I believed these programs, these social service programs and everything, really were designed to help people. And I found out that they weren't. They were a complete fiasco. They're just BS. They should all be taken down, and that money should be used productively instead. In terms of government being run as a business, there's an example of how not to do business, by the way. As I was losing everything, I was down to, frankly, my last couple $100s with no way to get an income, because it's really illegal for me to do anything I need to do to get out of this. For example, I can't get a P.O. box. You have to have a permanent address to get a P.O. box, and it says at the bottom, under penalty of perjury, and since that's federal, I think it's a felony. I certify all information is true and correct. I don't have an address to put in that box, but it's required that you put one there. So I would have to commit perjury, a felony, to get a P.O. box so I could receive mail. I haven't received mail in 2 years. Makes it a little hard to do things like your taxes, for example, among other things. Just about anything you apply for, such as voter registration. What's your address? At the bottom, under penalty of perjury, a felony, I certify this is true and correct. There you go. Anyway, I don't want to go into details about that, but that's how I lost everything by attrition. I had to learn that this is the reality of homelessness when I expected something out there that was meant to actually help. Because again, I should be the easiest person in the world to get out of homelessness. But it would require anybody anywhere to do anything to actually help me. And in 2 years, nobody did in Minnesota. I've never seen that in other states. Maybe things have changed since I moved here, but there's something different about Minnesota. I'll just leave it at that. So what happened was, when you're homeless, you're moving around and you're sleeping in the car. I have a car with nothing but windows, so I'm totally exposed. And do a Google search on violence against the homeless, and you'll see why that's a problem. So I'm trying to protect myself, and anywhere I would sleep, not nightly, but a couple times a week, I would get, and I'd wake up and there'd be a flashlight in my eyes and some headlights up there and a police officer doing what they call making contact. And I don't have a problem with that. They're making sure I'm safe. They're making sure I'm not a threat to the area. That's okay. I have no problem with that. It gets a little tedious after a while when the police don't tell each other that they've checked on me already, so I end up meeting every member of the police department over time. Sleep interruption and sleep deprivation is one of the biggest problems we face, because that has a huge impact on your psyche and your bodily health and other things. So being awake in that often, and the fact is it starts to kick in a kind of fight or flight mode, so that you go to sleep but you're sleeping with one eye open and you're just nervous. You're just thinking, like, when's this not going to come? When's it going to come? And often it comes. Now, some police are better than others. I'm one of these people who has great respect for the police. I love them. I appreciate what they do for us. But again, you get a rogue cop, you get a bad cop. I don't like that. And the jurisdiction I'm in right at this particular moment is a department I love. These are great officers. I would take a bullet for them. These are good people. I like them. I've been in other jurisdictions as I get moved around trying to sleep somewhere where they aren't so nice. And what happened was I kept getting, they would knock and they would maybe say, you can't sleep here. I'm sleeping in a store parking lot and the store doesn't want me there. And I would say, okay, that's fine. I understand. I'm happy to go somewhere else, but give me an alternative. Tell me where I can go. And the thing is, they can never tell me where I can go, because there is nowhere I can go. That's the reality of the matter. Anywhere I go, I'm violating something. And that's the way it is. So they would make their best suggestions. They would say, well, why don't you try Walmart? Why don't you try this, that, and the other thing? Eventually, through all of this, one of them said, why don't you try the truck stop, which was down the highway further than I've been from the Twin Cities since I moved here. I haven't been that far from the Twin Cities in all those years. So I went to this truck stop. This was one of the jurisdictions that did not have the best cops. The police officers there were not so good. These are not ones I'm proud of, which becomes very relevant to this whole story, actually. At a truck stop, cars and trucks come in and they're tired, they take a nap, and then they hit the road again. I ended up, because when I got there, I was basically out of my last money. I had, $400, and that can go very, very quickly. I have to burn $10, $15, $20 a day in gasoline without moving my car just to keep this warm enough. You have no idea how cold I am right now. My hands are just icy cold. Okay, and I had the heater running when I started this video. That's how quickly it gets cold in here in the winter. My feet are cold. I have to burn $10, $20 in gas every single day, and that means leaving my car running all day long, every single day, month after month after month. It has destroyed my car. So you can see how, $300, $400 isn't going to last long. Food, it isn't going to last long. So when I ended up at this truck stop, I more or less had to park and sit there for about 2, 3 months. Months. Just sitting in this chair because there's nothing else I could do. What am I going to do? Take a chunk of that $300, $400 to go drive to the Twin Cities again and get no satisfaction whatsoever, as I had for the previous 2 years or year? No. So as I'm sitting there and I'm getting pretty desperate, sorry, I'm gonna have trouble with this talking this much in this cold weather. As I'm sitting at this truck stop and I'm basically got my own parking place, anyone can tell I'm homeless because I'm there all the time. I'm not coming in, taking a nap, and leaving. I'm there every single day, and I'm sitting in the car. There's nothing else I can do, really. But I told you before, one of the things I do is I observe, and I look for patterns, and I learn all the time. So as I'm sitting here, what you have in front of me is a McDonald's. Over here is a cheap motel, and then a small strip mall with little restaurants and a laundromat, things like that. And I'm observing them, and I'm watching what goes on over time. And I learn things. For example, I learned how the drug dealers made their drug deals over there. How they would pull in next to the windows, do their deal, and then take off in opposite directions. So you'd have to have more than one cop to follow them both, and that kind of thing. And I learned how the pimps would drop off their prostitutes or drop them off usually in the parking lot at one spot, and the prostitutes would walk over to the motel, and then they would apparently call the pimp, and the pimp would come pick them up. I learned how the high school kids in this town, and this, let's face it, I'm going to come out and say it because they proudly say it themselves. This isn't me being insulting. They call themselves rednecks. It's a redneck town, hence the problem I had with the police here. The kids at this high school would come out and they would do their drugs out behind me next to the car wash. And they were smoking in the pipes, they were smoking something that made them crawl all over the walls. I don't think it was marijuana. And as I observed these things going on, I got to know all of these activities. And that's not to mention all the traffic violations, the incredible amount of danger from the way these people were driving so recklessly. And I was learning license plate numbers. I just learned how all this works. And you know what? I don't care. That's not something I ever wanted to know. I could care less how to make a drug deal or how a pimp works. I guess in some academic sense it's nice to know something new, but that isn't knowledge I want to seek out. It's all I had in front of me as I'm sitting in this car. There wasn't anything else going on except criminal activity. And it's interesting, I'm in a grocery store parking lot right now. And when you come and go and you get groceries, you pull in, you park, you go into the store, you come out, put your groceries, and you leave. I'm sitting here watching this happen day after day after day. And you know what? I see these people pull in just like I used to, get their groceries and leave. They might even have their small children with them, next to them. And they don't even know, but I do, that just a few feet away from them, there's something pretty nasty going on. Because I'm sitting there watching the pickup truck who has 2 prostitutes come in to service them. And I see the drug deals that go down and how they go down in this parking lot right next to your car where you've got your children. And if you don't believe me, try it as an experiment. Next time you have a vacation, go park yourself in a place like this, a big parking lot, and just sit there for a few days, the whole day, and watch what goes on. And you're going to start seeing things you never dreamt were happening right around you, and you never even knew it. I'm so familiar with those things now, it's pretty scary. There's a lot more skullduggery out there than you would ever believe. But here's the thing, at the truck stop, as I'm watching all this criminal activity, the police would come in, and everyone knew I was homeless because my car's there all the time and I'm in it all the time. The police would come in and they would drive right past the drug dealers, right past the pimps, right past the prostitutes, right past the high school kids doing drugs, and they would pull up behind me in my car and stop. And eventually, they would start going again. And then they would leave the truck stop. In all the time I was there, I never saw a drug deal get stopped by the police. I never saw a prostitute, pimp get stopped. Certainly nothing with those high school kids. But they would very frequently pull up behind me like that. If you were uncomfortable with that pause that I just did there, because it screwed up the pacing of how I'm telling this story, imagine how I feel when I'm trying to sleep in this car and I'm that vulnerable. And these cops are ignoring all this crime going around me and all this reckless driving, but they feel compelled all the time to stop behind me. Question is, why are they doing that? Because Minnesota's response to homelessness is to exterminate the homeless off camera. And one means they do that is to intimidate people so that they leave the jurisdiction and become someone else's problem. And the only reason I didn't give in to that intimidation is because I couldn't. I had no money, resources left. I had no choice. But that's the kind of thing I've had to deal with. 2 years ago, I was working, I'm sitting in the office of the president of a multinational corporation. We're making life-saving devices. I couldn't be more proud of what I was doing, working with world-class, extraordinary teams. And that's the situation I find myself in. Now, as I'm there, I'm not just observing what's going on, I'm also trying to get the motor running and trying to figure out what can I possibly do. I have got to make money. I can't get a job. I have no way to maintain my hygiene. I smell so bad nobody can stand to be within 10 feet of me, and I don't blame them. There's no way to maintain hygiene. The state of Minnesota has provided no facilities, especially for men. Again, there's nothing I can do. And I was thinking, and I thought, well, my car is just so filthy. This is horrifying. I mean, this is awful. And I thought, well, those trucks have to be just as bad or worse because they travel across the country and they live in these trucks. They need someone to clean out their cabs. And truck drivers make good money and they pay good money. So I started doing what you might call market research, feasibility study. I started asking the drivers what they needed, what they wanted, what they had. I started looking into how much supplies would cost to do something like that. And I started asking around about competition. And what happened was, at these businesses in the truck stop, some people would tell me, I think there's actually a truck wash over there on the other side of the gas station. And I was like, what? So I'd been there for 3 months. I didn't know that. Walking into the gas station every day, several times every day. But they would say, I think there's a truck wash over there, but I don't know if it's open. I don't know what they do. You might just go check that. I was like, okay. So one day I did. I went over to the truck wash, and inside was the owner, and I talked to the owner, and it turns out he had just taken over ownership of this place 3 months earlier. Before that, there was a month gap between the previous owner and him. So he had been there for 3 months. They did not clean cabs, but by that time I had determined there's no feasible way for me to do it. I didn't have the money to even buy supplies. There's no way to run a business like that. I might have been able to make a few dollars here and there, but again, these quick fixes aren't what I need. I need to get out of homelessness. So I had the idea, well, I should ask this guy for a job because the truck wash had showers. So I asked him for a job. And you can imagine how he felt. I told him what my background was, and he's like, what? This... Seriously? Let me get this straight. You were this high in business, you were making that much money, and you want to wash trucks? And I said, no, well, I don't want to wash trucks, but I got to do what I got to do, and I'm not afraid of hard work, and my body is atrophying from sitting in this chair for so many months in this car. I need the physical workout. And I said, you give me this job, and I'm going to do a great job for you, and I promise you, unlike probably what else you're going to get at this pay scale, when I leave, I'll give you proper notice. And he said, fill out an application and come back in a few days. I filled out the application, and he wrote the application himself, so it did not say under penalty of perjury. And he told me to put the truck wash address in there, so I did. So I talked to him a few days later when I came in, and he hired me there on the spot. And from that point on, I was a truck washer. A truck washer. And you know what? I couldn't have been happier. I was making money, I was getting a physical workout, and I went at it with everything I've gone at every other job. And that's where this story of how not to do business really comes to life. Because when you take someone out of the corporate world who's that motivated and that competent and who shows that much initiative that I do, and you put them in a truck wash that's just starting out under new ownership, imagine what could happen. The problem is, that's not what happened. We could have made this place a money-making bonanza for so many reasons I'll talk about in this series. And instead, what happened? The business is failing, it never turned a profit, and everyone who ever became associated with that place was hurt, if not absolutely destroyed. And in my case, the destruction is life-threatening. How that came about is how I'm going to describe to you how not to do business. The sad fact is, this owner who had taken over this business 3 months earlier, he went to business school. I did not. And yet, he didn't have the slightest concept of how to run a business. Every single business principle you can think of, he negated it. It was as if you couldn't send in someone to destroy a business more effectively than him. And this was his own business. So, in that sense, it's a very sad story. And the fact that I'm in worse shape now than when I started. When I started at this truck wash, I immediately made a plan based on the $9 an hour he was paying me. I set out a budget and a plan by October 1st, and I left a buffer for maybe November 1st, but one of those two times I would be out, have all the money I need to go to another state, get an apartment, paying ahead on rent if necessary, and from then, once I have an apartment and a hygiene, getting a job is no problem. My homelessness would have ended, period. Once and for all, end of story. And he ran this business so poorly, instead, it ended up totally devastating me and everyone else, every other employee, everyone associated with this place. So the truck wash is the model I'm going to use for this series on how not to do business. And sadly, it's the perfect model for that. I'm really sorry this happened, but it did. And in my current situation, what else can I do? I can either die quietly in my car like Minnesota wants me to, be cremated, buried in a mass grave off camera, no one will ever know it happened, or I can try to drum up support from people outside of Minnesota by creating a series like this. Remember, by endurance we shall prevail. That's the reason I'm making this video. So I hope you will subscribe. I hope you'll like the video, leave comments, suggestions, what have you. Please, if you feel compelled to, put a tip in the tip jar, send me a donation, send me a job offer, send me a suggestion, encouragement, something to help me survive this and to get out of this once and for all. I would greatly appreciate it. In exchange, I'm going to try to give you the best series I possibly can on how not to do business. With that, I'll let you go, and I look forward to having you back for the part 2 of this introduction. Thank you so much for watching.